Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're the show that takes a whole stack of sources, articles, research, you name it, and boils it all down into the most important nuggets of knowledge for you.
That's the idea.
And today, we're diving deep into something really special. It's about art. Yes, but art that does more than just look beautiful. We're talking about art with, well, profound spiritual and historical weight. Art that can almost transport you.
We are. Today's deep dive is into the really quite captivating world of icons and iconography. And like you said, these aren't just paintings you'd glance at in a museum. They're sacred images.
Sacred images.
Deeply, deeply tied up with prayer, with the whole theology of the incarnation of Christ, and just layered with meaning, especially, within the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's a really rich area.
So our mission, our goal for this deep dive is to unpack this amazing journey. It's an ancient art form, right?
Absolutely ancient.
And we want to see how it somehow really survived near eradication during some pretty intense times of religious oppression.
Right, the Soviet era especially.
Exactly. And maybe even more interesting, how it's being revitalized now, reinterpreted by a new generation of artists. So we'll look at the history, the philosophy, the theology behind it all, the actual techniques, which sound incredibly meticulous. They call it writing, an icon, not painting.
That word writing is key. Yeah, it tells you so much.
And then how contemporary artists are sort of pushing the boundaries, but still honoring this deep tradition. It sounds fascinating.
And we've got some great guides. We'll look closely at the experiences of two really remarkable artists. First, there's Vladimir Grygorenko. His story is amazing, rediscovering this tradition in the post-Soviet world.
Okay.
And then a contemporary Greek artist, Fikos. He's doing something really unique, blending traditional Byzantine iconography with, street art.
Street art, wow, okay.
Yeah.
That I want to hear about.
Yeah. Their stories, their journeys, they give us a fantastic lens to see the bigger picture, what's happening in the iconography community today. It should be quite a journey.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. What is an icon? Because, for most of us, that word means like a little picture on our phone screen, or maybe just a symbol. But this is clearly something much deeper.
It is, absolutely. The word icon itself, it's straight from Greek icona, just means image. Simple enough.
Okay.
But then you have iconography, iconographia, and that translates literally as to write an icon.
Right, you mentioned that write, not paint. Why is that distinction so important?
Well, because it implies it's not just about, artistic self-expression. It's seen as a spiritual act, a participation in revealing truth, almost like writing a sacred text, but visually. You don't just slap paint on wood, you write the icon.
So it's like a visual scripture almost, a sacred language.
That's a great way to put it, a visual language, a form of sacred communication. The core Orthodox belief is that icons aren't just flat images on a wall. They're seen as doorways or windows. Yeah, windows between our world, the earthly realm, and the divine, the spiritual world. And crucially, movement can happen both ways through that window.
Both ways. How so?
Well, when you stand before an icon in prayer, the person depicted Christ, or Mary the Theotokos, or a saint, is believed to be truly present. Not physically, of course, but present in their essence through that spiritual, symbolic representation.
Okay, so it's a connection, not worshiping the object itself.
Exactly. That's the crucial distinction. It's not idolatry, worshiping the wood and paint. The veneration, the honor you give the image, is understood to pass through it to the prototype, the actual person depicted. It's about relationship connection.
That makes a lot more sense. And I've heard this is all deeply connected to the incarnation of Christ, that specific theological point. Why is that so vital for icons?
Yes. It's absolutely foundational. Icons are seen as, a direct, tangible witness to the incredible fact that God became depictable.
Depictable.
Think about it. Before Christ, God in his absolute essence was understood as unseen, infinite, unknowable. How could you possibly paint that? It wouldn't make sense.
Right. Forbidden even in some interpretations.
But then it goes in the incarnation. God takes on human flesh in Jesus Christ. The divine becomes visible, touchable, human. And that act, God taking a human body, is the theological cornerstone that makes iconography not just possible, but for the Orthodox, essential. It's a visual testament to God entering our world.
Okay, so that's the deep belief. Where did this art form actually start? It feels incredibly old.
Oh, it is. Its origins go way back, rooted in the Byzantine style. We're talking over 1,000 years of accumulated tradition here. Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, really nurtured this art form, gave it its unique visual and spiritual language.
But it wasn't always accepted, was it? I remember reading about a huge controversy, a period where icons were actually destroyed. It sounds terrifying.
It was a major, major conflict. You're thinking of the iconoclastic controversy. It raged, really, from the 7th to the 9th centuries. And it wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was a profound, sophisticated debate about what art even is and what its role should be in religion.
So who are the sides in this debate?
You had the iconoclasts, the image breakers. They argued fiercely against icons, fearing they'd lead people into idolatry, worshiping the creation instead of the creator. A didactic view, maybe?
Okay, the image breakers and the other side.
They were the iconojewels, the image generators, or iconophiles, lovers of icons. They defended using icons, arguing for that theological connection we just discussed. But their opponents often accused them of being basically pagan, of worshiping the physical object, which of course completely missed the point of venerating the prototype.
And the main argument against icons, it usually goes back to the commandment about graven images, doesn't it?
It does, and that's a really common misunderstanding. That commandment in the Old Testament was specifically about pagan idols, statues made to represent false gods. But if you look closely at the Old Testament itself, you see images were part of Israelite worship, just not as gods. The temple had carvings, cherubim, pomegranates, and Moses himself, remember, made a bronze serpent on God's command.
Right, the bronze serpent. Good point.
So the ban wasn't on all images, just on worshiping them as deities.
That clarifies things a lot. So images weren't forbidden outright, and Christian art existed even before this big Byzantine flourishing, right? Even earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Some of the earliest Christian art with a clear spiritual purpose is found in the Roman catacombs, late 2nd century, often simple, symbolic stuff made by people meeting in secret.
Wow.
And what's also really interesting and kind of challenges the idea that ancient Judaism was fiercely anti-art is discoveries like the synagogue at Dura Europos from around 244 CE. It had extensive figurative wall paintings. So the use of religious images was actually more complex back then than we sometimes think.
And then there's the tradition about St. Luke, the gospel writer, being the first iconographer.
Yeah.
Painting the Virgin Mary. Is that history or more like legend?
Ah, yes, the St. Luke tradition. It's a powerful origin story. He's credited with painting the Hodigetria icon, She Who Points the Way, and associated with the famous Our Lady of Vladimir icon from Russia.
So did he actually paint them?
Well, that's where history gets a bit fuzzy. Many scholars think this story actually emerged later, maybe around the 8th or 9th century, right in the middle of the iconoclast controversy.
Oh, convenient timing.
Exactly. It likely served a crucial purpose, giving icons this apostolic authority, this direct link back to the time of Christ and Mary to help win the argument against the iconoclasts. It shows how these foundational stories can develop to meet really deep theological needs.
Speaking of deep needs and big shifts, despite surviving iconoclasm, this art form almost vanished again in the 20th century. How did something so ancient, so embedded, face extinction so recently?
It's a tragic chapter. After Constantinople fell in the 1400s, the real center of iconography shifted to Russia. It absolutely flourished there for centuries, became part of the national soul, really, until the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. That brought in the Soviet Union and its enforced atheism. The policy was brutal and systematic, eradicate religion and iconography along with it. Churches were closed en masse. Their property, including countless priceless icons, was nationalized, seized by the state.
So making icons actually became illegal, a crime.
It did. An officially forbidden trade. If you were caught, you could go to prison. The scale of destruction was just immense. By the 1930s, maybe only 150 churches were still functioning in all of Russia. Think about that, down from tens of thousands. And vast private collections were confiscated, too.
What happened to all those seized icons? Just destroyed?
Some were. Others were initially put into museums, sort of reframed as historical artifacts or examples of superstition, but often without proper cataloging or care. Then things took another turn. The Soviet regime desperately needed hard currency. So they started selling icons deemed unsuitable for museums. And when those sales were successful, they began selling off even the most valuable, most sacred pieces to buyers abroad, just treated as commodities to fund the state. It was a cultural and spiritual catastrophe.
That's just heartbreaking. So for someone like Vladimir Grygorenko, growing up in Soviet Ukraine, what was the impact? Did he even see traditional icons?
The impact was huge, kind of spiritual emptiness in the public square. Many icons vanished, hidden away by brave people, but so many were lost. Grigorenko himself remembers seeing very little authentic religious art growing up. Mostly, he says, it was poor copies of Western religious paintings, not the Byzantine style. And even before the Soviets, southern Ukraine had lost many older icons due to earlier conflicts, so the repression just made it worse.
But even under all that pressure, people still wanted religious images, didn't they? For their own private faith.
They absolutely did. Even when public worship was dangerous, people sought out images for private prayer. Often, these were, poor quality reproductions of Western devotional pictures smuggled in or maybe crudely made. But it shows this incredibly deep human need for that connection, that visual anchor for faith that even intense oppression couldn't stamp out. And that lingering hunger really sets the stage for Grigorenko's own story.
Which brings us right to him. Vladimir Grygorenko. His journey sounds incredible, especially given where he started. Not exactly a traditional path to iconography, was it?
Not even close. It's almost unbelievable. He grew up in Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine, during the later Soviet years. His family was educated, respected, but staunchly atheist. That was the prevailing culture, really. Believers were often looked down on, considered, losers, as he put it.
And he studied rocket engineering.
Rocket engineering, yeah. About as far from painting saints as you can imagine, so his turn towards iconography was, highly unlikely.
From rockets to Rublev, how did that happen? Was there a turning point?
Well, his interest in art started in a university art studio back in '82, just exploring. But it went deeper than a hobby. He started asking these really fundamental questions. What is beauty? Why pursue it? That led him on this intellectual quest, looking for common principles in the greats Rublev, the iconographer, Cézanne, Rembrandt.
Diverse group.
Very. He figured if he could find what they shared, he'd find the essence of beauty. And he got fascinated by how they used space.
Space. Interesting.
Yeah.
How did that lead to icons?
Well, his study of space led him particularly to Byzantine iconography, which uses perspective in space in ways totally different from Western naturalism. At the same time, he was getting disillusioned with contemporary art. He felt it was obsessed with just being unique.
Prioritizing novelty over maybe truth.
That's exactly how he saw it. He felt contemporary art was all about being totally unique and totally subjective. He said, quite powerfully, that Byzantine art, like classical art, tried to say something about God or the universe, learn from nature. But contemporary art just wanted novelty. He explicitly said, that was my choice. I decided not to follow that direction. He wanted something deeper, more universal.
That's a really conscious, profound choice. And it's amazing that it was the art of iconography that led him to faith, not the other way around. Usually it's faith first, right?
It's a remarkable reversal, shows the power inherent in the icons themselves. He started by just copying icons from books he could find, museum catalogs. He saw it initially as just another style to learn, a technical challenge.
Okay.
Then he took some of his early attempts to a local Orthodox church. This was a time when churches were just starting to timidly reopen as Soviet power weakened.
I bet the priest was surprised. Here's this atheist rocket engineer showing up with icons.
You can imagine. And the priest himself was fascinating, a former jazz musician, recently converted, full of passion. He was impressed by Grigorenko's work, the traditional style, but he asked the obvious question, why don't you come to church?
And Grigorenko
said he didn't believe in God, just like that. This atheist upbringing was deep, but that encounter, it sparked something.
So the priest saw a project, a potential convert.
Pretty much. A very personal mission. And it happened right when Grigorenko himself was feeling this growing spiritual void, this need for something more, especially with the whole Soviet system collapsing around them. A year later, 1991, he was baptized.
Wow.
But here's the thing. The priest, being new himself, couldn't really give him deep theological teaching. So for about 5 years, Grigorenko was largely figuring out Christianity on his own. And his main teacher, the very act of painting icons, he learned about God through the process.
That perfectly illustrates that post-Soviet experience you mentioned, having to literally rebuild faith and practice from almost nothing after decades of suppression.
It really does. His story echoes many others from that first generation of post-Soviet iconographers. They were pioneers, rediscovering lost traditions. Eventually, he did find more formal teaching in Moscow with Father Georgy Kochetkov, who catechized him, taught him how to really read the Bible. That was crucial later on.
So for Grigorenko, art wasn't just art anymore. It became his spiritual path, his way of knowing God.
Absolutely. He describes it now as a means of prayer, of contemplation, a way to know the Creator better. Each icon he works on, he feels, reveals something new about Christ's personality, brings him closer. It's not self-expression in the modern sense. As another iconographer, Vladislav Andreev, put it, Art is not a means of self-expression, but a method and practice of the path to the transfiguration of his nature. It's about changing yourself through the act of creation.
So the artist's own spiritual state, their character, is actually part of the art, as important as technique. That's pretty radical compared to how we often think of artists today.
It's fundamental to the tradition. Your moral purity, your lifestyle, it matters. Because the icon is meant to be a clear window, right? Not clouded by the artist's ego. Some argue the decline in icon quality in the 16th, 17th centuries happened partly because that spiritual focus got lost. They became more decorative. Archimandrite Zenon, who became Grygorenko's teacher later, said it perfectly. Icon is embodied prayer.
Embodied prayer, that's beautiful.
It is created in prayer and for prayer. That's the essence.
And Grygorenko sees a missionary aspect too. It's not just personal devotion.
Definitely. He sees his work as a way to immerse people in the Orthodox worldview, to offer that perspective. He talks about how icons in a church need to speak to that specific community, meet their spiritual needs, while staying true to the church's teachings. So he actually meets with the communities, tries to understand them. It's this blend of deep piety and incredible skill, all in service.
Okay, let's talk about that skill, the craft itself. When the Soviets tried to wipe out iconography, what did that do to the actual knowledge of how to make icons? Was it all written down somewhere?
Well, some things were written, but so much of it was practical, hands-on knowledge passed down master to apprentice, and that was catastrophically disrupted. So iconographers like Grygorenko in the post-Soviet era, they had to consciously reject later, maybe westernized innovations and go back, way back, trying to reconstruct the methods of the 15th, 16th century Moscow school or even earlier Byzantine techniques. It was like artistic archaeology.
Rebuilding a lost language, you said. And the materials themselves sound very different from what artists use today.
Oh, completely. Tradition demands using mineral pigments, ground-up clays, actual semi-precious stones, think vibrant blue lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, red cinnabar from China.
Wow.
These natural pigments are ground fine and mixed with egg tempera, the binder, just egg yolk and white wine. That's it. And the final varnish, Alifa, is a special mix based on linseed oil. It's incredibly connected to the natural world.
And this is where Grygorenko's rocket science background unexpectedly helped. That scientific mindset.
It really did. It's amazing. He didn't just guess. He used his scientific training. He studied old texts, examined museum icons like a material scientist. He actually collaborated with a chemist to analyze and recreate the Alifa varnish. He went to scientific institutes asking questions, gathering data, all through meticulous trial and error, driven by this desire to perfectly recreate the look and durability of the ancient icons.
That's incredible dedication. And did he find practical benefits to these old materials beyond just being historically accurate?
Yes. He found they are incredibly durable, incredibly light-fast. The colors stay true for centuries, unlike many modern synthetic pigments. And he noticed they have this natural harmony. The colors just work together beautifully, reflecting maybe the harmony of creation itself. The methods he rediscovered are essentially the same ones used in medieval workshops. He helped reforge that broken chain of knowledge.
It's amazing to think of this art form surviving near extinction, and then people having to basically reverse engineer it.
It truly is. And it was a conscious choice. You know, in the 18th and 19th centuries, Western oil painting techniques became popular in Russia, and the old icon canon was sometimes dismissed as rigid. But this modern revival deliberately went back to the older ways, seeking that purity, that spiritual depth of the Byzantine and early Russian masters, looking back to move forward.
And his first major commission, it was for a place that perfectly symbolized that Soviet suppression, wasn't it?
Well, the irony is unbelievable. His first big project was to help recreate the iconostasis, that screen of icons for a cathedral in his city that the Soviets had turned into a museum of religion and atheism.
A museum of atheism. You can't make this up.
Right. He and a friend worked intensely for a year, created 2 large icons, sketched out the rest. The icons were never actually installed, probably for political reasons. But that intense period of work, it was a crucial learning phase for him, forcing him to master the techniques on a large scale.
Eventually, this self-taught journey led him to a real master, someone who could guide him further.
Yes, that was the next key step. He eventually found Archimandrite Zenon, a monk living in a fairly remote monastery. Zenon himself had started teaching himself iconography back in the 1970s when it was still dangerous, still seen as anti-Soviet, a real act of quiet resistance.
Wow.
Xenon is now considered one of the greatest living Russian iconographers. Studying with him really completed Grigorenko's education, gave him that final layer of traditional wisdom and refinement.
Okay, so let's get into the process itself. This writing of an icon. You said it's a spiritual discipline. How does that play out in the actual steps?
It really permeates the whole process. The Prosopon school, which Grigorenko studied, really emphasizes this. It's not just art class. Iconographers often start the day with prayer. And there are traditional rules or guidelines for the iconographer that really set the tone.
Rules? Like what kind of rules do they actually affect the painting?
Oh, definitely. It's about preparing your inner state. Before starting, things like making the sign of the cross, praying silently, forgiving enemies, clearing the heart and mind. Working with intense care on every single detail, however small, as if God is right there watching.
Wow.
Maintaining silence, avoiding idle chatter, praying to the saint whose face you're painting, asking for their presence, their guidance. It's believed to strengthen you, keep you focused.
Asking for guidance even on, like, which color to use.
Yes. The guidelines suggest you should inwardly ask the Lord for counsel when choosing colors. And there's this emphasis on humility, not being jealous of other artists' work. Their success is your success. And finally, thanking God when it's finished, and being the first to pray before the icon yourself. It's a whole spiritual ecosystem around the act of creation.
That's incredibly profound. Okay, can you walk us through the actual stages from blank board to finished icon? It sounds like layers building up.
It is. A journey of light, truly. Let's simplify the Prosopon school's 12 stages. First, preparing the board. You start with carefully selected wood. A shallow recess, the kovcheg, meaning arc, is carved into the face, like a sacred space for the image.
An arc, okay.
Then linen cloth is glued down, and multiple thin layers of gesso are applied. Gesso is a mix of chalk, marble dust, water, glue. It's sanded and polished until it's incredibly smooth, hard, yet absorbent, ready for the image.
Then the drawing goes on.
Stage 2, image transfer and gilding. The design, often based on an ancient prototype, is drawn or traced onto the gesso. The lines are then either incised, scratched in, or painted thinly so they remain visible. Then bole, a red clay mixture, is applied wherever gold leaf will go, usually the halo in the background.
Why red clay under the gold?
It gives the gold a warm undertone and provides a smooth surface for burnishing. Once dry, the bowl is polished with stone, like agate. Then the magic part. The iconographer breathes warm, moist air onto the bowl to reactivate the glue slightly.
Just breathes on it.
Yes, and lays down super thin sheets of real gold leaf. Then it's burnished again, polished to a brilliant shine. Sometimes designs are punched or incised into the gold itself, catching the light, literally painting with light. That gold background symbolizes heavenly, uncreated light, an ideal space.
Painting with light. Amazing. Okay, gold is down. Now the actual paint. You said the first stroke is symbolic.
Yes, stage 3, first layer of paint, the Rosgrish, using egg tempera pigment mixed with egg yolk and wine. The very first touch of paint is often a thin red line around the halo, marks the start of the spiritual journey. Then flat areas of dark color are laid down, opening the white gesso to color. It echoes Genesis, creation from darkness. A base color, Sankir, a brownish green, goes down for skin and hair. Looks quite ghostly at this stage.
Sankir, okay. Then you build up from that.
Exactly. Stage 4. Redrawing the image. The incised or painted lines are reinforced. Stage 5. First highlights. Subtle forms start emerging from the dark base. Stage 6. First float. A transparent glaze of color adds depth, complexity, starts building contrast. There are typically 7 main layers. Background, 3 highlight layers, 3 float layers.
Building light upon light, like spiritual architecture.
Precisely. Stage 7. Next highlights. These are brighter, really radiating that inner light outwards. The style of these highlights can even identify different ancient schools. Stage 8. Next float. Warmer colors are glazed over the flesh areas, transforming that greenish Sankir into living skin tones. Sometimes pure white is used here for specific figures like Christ on the Dandelion, signifying divinity.
And then the final sparks of light.
Stage 9. Final highlights. These are the brightest touches. Includes ozivki, that lovely Russian word meaning enlivening touches. Tiny strokes of pure light on the eyes, nose, cheekbones. They really bring the face to life, like the breath of God. Stage 10. Final float. Often a very thin golden glaze over the face, unifying the highlights, giving that characteristic inner glow.
And the lines. Do they come back?
Yes. Stage 11, final lines. Those initial drawing lines are carefully reestablished, pulling everything into sharp focus. And finally, stage 12, the finished icar. adding the inscription, the name, maybe the ICXC monogram for Jesus Christ, or the He Who Is letters in his halo.
And is there one last step after all that painting?
There is. After the tempera paint is fully dry and cured, a layer of olifa, that special linseed oil varnish, is carefully applied over the painted surface. It saturates the colors, protects the icon, and gives it that deep, gem-like glow. It's like the icon is being baptized in oil. The final seal on this whole spiritual and artistic process.
That is just astonishingly detailed. And you mentioned the style allows seeing through to the white gesso board. What's the symbolism there?
That transparency, especially in the Russian Byzantine membrane style, is key. Seeing the white gesso underneath symbolizes the uncreated light of God shining through the image, the divine source. It connects to the terms used for the layers. Highlights are angelic, cosmic. The lines are alpha and omega, beginning and end. It's all imbued with meaning.
And the perspective is also completely different, isn't it? Not like Renaissance paintings.
Totally different. It's often reverse perspective. Things get bigger as they go back. Instead of drawing you into a realistic scene, it feels like the spiritual world is opening out towards you. You, the viewer, become the vanishing point. And the light comes from the figures, radiating out, symbolizing their holiness, not lit from outside. It's an encounter.
So every little detail, the way an ear is painted, a hand gesture, it all means something.
Absolutely. It's a highly coded language. Ears might be shaped to show listening to God, mouths to show speaking divine truth. St. John the theologian often has fingers to his lips, symbolizing his wisdom comes from deep thought, not just speech. It's a silent sermon.
A visual language requiring its own kind of literacy.
Indeed. The whole thing, start to finish, is seen as this journey of light. An iconographer teacher used a great analogy. We're like uncut diamonds. Life gives us facets. Our purpose, like the saints, is to reflect God's light back into the world. Looking at an icon, contemplating Christ or the saints is meant to sanctify you, fill you with joy. It's a living thing.
Okay, that's the deep tradition, meticulously reclaimed. But what happens when that tradition runs headlong into something totally modern, even disruptive, like street art, which brings us to Fikos?
Right, and it's important context that after the Soviet collapse, there was this real hunger in Eastern Europe for spiritual identity, combined with scholars rediscovering the artistic brilliance of old icons. This sparked a huge global revival. Fikos is part of that, but taking it somewhere completely unexpected.
He's from Athens, born in '87, and he somehow connects traditional iconography with street art. That just sounds like polar opposites. Graffiti is often seen as rebellious, urban, maybe even vandalism. Icons are sacred, peaceful, liturgical. How does he bridge that?
It does seem like a massive contradiction, doesn't it? But Fikos is very thoughtful about it. He makes a clear distinction. He talks about basic graffiti tagging versus street art, and then what he does, which he calls neo-muralism. Large-scale public painting, more like fine art, intended to beautify, not deface. He notes how Athens suffers from graffiti damage, and he wants his murals to be a positive contribution.
So monumental public art, not just tagging. And he had serious icon training early on.
Critically important, yes. At only 13, he apprenticed for 5 years with George Cordis, a major figure in contemporary iconography. Cordis taught him the techniques, color, light, composition, the alphabet and syntax of Byzantine art. But maybe more importantly, Cordis taught him a way of thinking, insight, digging deeper, questioning, finding truth. This rigorous training gave Fikos the foundation and confidence to develop his own voice.
Which makes you question what tradition really means. Is it just copying the past? Fikos seems to challenge that.
He absolutely does. He pushes back against rigid categories like high versus low art. He argues against treating the church like a museum, just blindly replicating old styles without adapting them. That, he says, is just history, a dead thing. True tradition for him is alive.
So tradition is more like a toolkit. Something you have to test and adapt.
Exactly. He calls tradition a tool, this huge accumulation of experience and wisdom, but he insists it must be questioned for its usefulness now in new situations. Not questioned disrespectfully, but tested for function. He calls his work contemporary Byzantine painting.
Contemporary Byzantine painting. That sounds almost like an oxymoron. How does he define that?
He says Byzantine refers to the core principles, the theology, the visual language, the purpose. Contemporary means combining those principles with a style, an outer form that speaks to our time meaningfully. Not just superficial changes like using modern colors. He argues it's impossible for a modern artist, living with electricity, modernism, acrylic paints, to truly paint like a 13th century monk using natural light and fresco.
So even the original Byzantine artists weren't just copyists. They were innovating within their tradition.
Precisely. Fikos points out that the old masters wrote the word life, each one of them in their own handwriting. They weren't just tracing. So he finds huge creative freedom within the canon, combining elements, emphasizing things, conveying the personality of a saint, like good portraiture. Faithful to the subject, but capturing their essence. He feels the canon liberates creativity, doesn't restrict it if you understand it deeply.
And he talks about art's social role, too, using that Greek word demiurgia.
Yes, demiurgia, meaning work for the citizens, for society. He believes true art expresses both the artist and the community, which fits perfectly with icons being liturgical art, art by and for the people. He moves easily between church commissions, street murals, gallery shows. The tradition informs everything without being cynical or shallow.
So he uses this Byzantine language to talk about universal human stuff, not just religious subjects.
Very much so. His non-liturgical work explores themes like pain, joy, love, redemption, things everyone relates to, often drawing on mythology or folklore as well. He sees Byzantine art as a powerful visual language. Its forms make sense for religious subjects, but if you use it for other themes, you adapt the elements. The sacredness we perceive, he suggests, is often in our cultural understanding, not inherent only in the style itself. It's flexible.
And he's done this on a massive scale, like that mural in Kyiv.
Incredible piece, Earth and Sky, 46 meters high, the largest mural in the Greek Byzantine tradition ever, apparently. He uses grids for something that big, of course, but relies heavily on his experience and eye. It was inspired partly by Munch's Art Nouveau figures, adapted to the building shape. It's a huge statement that this ancient tradition has inexhaustible pictorial possibilities when treated as a living thing.
Okay, stepping back again. Beyond the artists and techniques, what are the big philosophical and theological ideas holding this all up? It's obviously more than just art.
It really is. At its core, an icon is understood as having this dual nature. It's material paint, wood, gold, but it's also profoundly spiritual. That duality, understood through centuries of Christian experience, is key. It's not just about style. It's a spiritual landmark, a source of transcendental light connecting us to God.
Transcendental light. What does transcendence mean here? How does paint on wood point to something beyond knowing?
Well, transcendence itself means what's beyond our direct knowledge, ultimately unknowable. But transcendental means recognizing the importance of knowing about that reality beyond our senses. Icons help bridge that. Through their symbolism, their stylized forms, even their deformations of reality, they point towards the transcendent, the mystery of God's world. They suggest that divine reality can be known partly through faith, a priori, and partly through experience, a posteriori. Icons facilitate that experience,
helping us grasp the ultimate mystery, like the incarnation.
Exactly. The incarnation, God becoming human, is Christianity's central mystery. Icons, like Scripture, are seen as ways God reveals these secrets, stimulating our minds and spirits to reach beyond the everyday, a visual pathway to divine truth.
And you mentioned metaphysicality. Is that about depicting a higher, more perfect reality?
Yes. Metaphysics here refers to that high spiritual realm where God, the risen Christ, the saints exist in glory. Iconographers try to convey this not by painting realistically, but by deliberately deforming visible space, using revised perspective, stylized figures to make that spiritual world seem incomparably better, more real, more glorious than our world.
And light and color are crucial for that, divine light.
Inextricably linked. Ideas about divine light from early theologians like Dionysius the Areopagite are woven into how light and color are used. It connects to the idea of the ideal. Theologically, the ideal isn't just a better version of the material, it's something fundamentally different, unmatched in the material world. The gold backgrounds and halos are the most obvious expression of this, representing that ideal, heavenly space, that uncreated light.
So it connects us to the source of being itself, to God.
Which brings us to the ontological aspect. Ontology is about the fundamental nature of being. In Christian thought, God is the source of all existence. Icons are believed to stimulate our supersensible reserves, our spiritual capacity, prompting this flight of ideas to the higher forms of being, helping us grasp something of God's own nature. The Bible's ontological truths are seen as embedded in icon creation.
And Christianity puts humanity's center stage in a way, which icons reflect vividly, all those human figures.
That's Christian anthropologism, the view that humanity is God's perfect creation, so perfect God became human. So unlike some traditions that avoid human figures in worship spaces, Christian churches are full of them. Christ, Mary, the saints, they aren't worshipped as gods, but seen as guides, examples, supporters of one almighty God.
So it shows humanity reaching for God and God reaching down to humanity.
Precisely. Think of the iconostasis screen in an Orthodox church. Christ is central, surrounded by his saints. It's a powerful image of humanity ascending towards the divine, and the divine sanctifying the human. It's not making humans into gods, but showing this beautiful complementarity, God-centered, theocentric, and human-centered, anthropocentric, at the same time. The artistry serves to draw believers into that relationship.
This sounds very structured. There must be rules, a canon guiding all this. It can't be just artistic whim.
Absolutely. Canonical authority is huge in Eastern Christianity. Observing established rules, theory, and practice is fundamental. A key moment was the Trullan Council back in 691-692. It decreed that icons should depict Christ historically as the God-man, ending purely symbolic representations. It directly linked the dogma of the Incarnation to how icons should be made.
Saying because God became visibly human, we depict him visibly human.
Exactly. The council affirmed that humanity got to know God personally in Christ, and even pointed to authentic images like the Mandylion, image of Edessa, or Veronica's towel as prototypes. Then, the Seventh Ecumenical Council in 787 really cemented icon veneration, famously stating, the veneration of the icon passes on to the foretype. It locked in the theological basis.
How are these rules practically passed down? Written manuals?
Yes. After iconoclasm was finally defeated, masters in Constantinople developed practical rules compiled into handbooks called Herminias, or painter's manuals. These guided style and technique throughout the Byzantine world. The canon covers iconography, which saints, scenes, and symbols are used, stylistics, the specific artistic language, and technique, the materials and methods.
Are there standard ways Christ or Mary must be depicted?
Oh yes. There are specific canonical types for Christ the Pantoloric writer, ruler of all, the man of sorrows, the not made by hands image. For the Theotokos, Mary, there are main types like the Hortigetria, pointing the way, or the Elusa, Virgin of Tenderness. It's a rich visual theology combining study of the church, ecclesiology, and humanity, anthropology.
And lastly, there's a mystical dimension. That can sound controversial.
It can be. Christian mysticism is usually focused on the sacraments, but icons are believed to reveal God's secrets, divine truths. And then you have miracle-working icons. These are believed to be special conduits for the Holy Spirit's power, bringing healing or salvation. The miracle isn't from the paint or the artist, but flows from the saint depicted because the icon captured their spiritual essence so clearly. They become vessels of grace.
What an incredibly rich and layered world we've explored today. From ancient roots through near destruction to this vibrant, sometimes surprising modern revival. We've touched on the deep prayer, the painstaking craft, the profound ideas that make icons so much more than art, truly windows to heaven.
It really is a fascinating journey. We've seen icons aren't just static objects, but active participants in spiritual life, embodying prayer, revealing truth. And artists like Grygorenko and Fikos, coming from such different places, showed that tradition isn't a dead end, it's a living language. It can inspire incredible creativity and connection, finding freedom within the canon, not by rejecting it, finding new ways to speak that ancient truth.
So here's something to ponder as we wrap up. Think about how this ancient art form, rediscovered, reinterpreted, keeps bridging the material and spiritual past and present. What might it mean for you in your own life to view creativity, maybe writing, problem solving, anything as a journey of light, a process that transforms not just the work, but you, the creator, and maybe radiates something truthful outwards? And are there other lost traditions, maybe closer to home, that might hold unexpected power? We took our own deep dive to rediscover them. Something to think about.
Until next time.